It's October 12th, 2023. Welcome to Axiom News Live, where each Thursday we engage strengths to catalyze change. Here we start with what's strong rather than what's wrong and lift up the stories of people whose work in the world we become connected to and care about. Some of you may be tuning in today to hear from two guests, Angela Fell and Shirish Kulkarni. During our last show, I promised they'd be joining us this week. They are, in fact, joining us next week. This is our 16th show. We've been posting faithfully since our first episode on June 15th. The show is a startup and one piece of an emerging news ecology. I know from a long history of new startups that it takes time to find patterns and to find a groove. Usually you don't get a sense for what's possible until at least the 3-month mark. And even then, it's usually just whispers from the emerging future that you hear. And you have to pay attention to even hear those. When I first put out the call to do this show, Shaun Loney, intrepid social entrepreneur that he is, immediately said yes and has shown up full on to find and invite guests and to co-host. The hour that makes it into the public view is a result of many, many more hours: social capital, wrangling and wrestling, research and scheduling, and production preparations. Shaun has shown up for all of it. We thought we'd take a moment today to pause and reflect on what it is we've been learning, sensing, as we've been walking this path together. Shaun, we are pre-recording our show today, in part because you are traveling between two First Nations during our usual showtime, which is, of course, as you would always have me pitch and say, at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And I understand you were keynoting at a conference yesterday in Alberta. I, too, have been in communities these last few weeks, and I'm picking things up in those gatherings and community conversations. So I thought it might also be interesting for us to explore what it is we're sensing there. But first, why don't we do as I've suggested and revisit why we're doing this show on the whole and what's bubbling up for us as a result. What's been striking you so far about this 3-month journey into being a newsmaker in this sort of way?
I love the Peter Pula soliloquies. Is that what they are at the beginning of the show?
Why not? Why not?
Whispers from the emerging future. Wow. That's what's emerging for me right now. It's just fantastic. Yeah, good day, Peter, and thank you for accommodating my schedule.
Absolutely.
As listeners will know, viewers will know, I spend a lot of time supporting Key Energy. Key Energy installs ground source heat pumps on First Nations. We've had a guest on the show, Honey Kershane, is a awesome Ojibwe woman, Ikwe in Ojibwe, and she's an installer and project manager, and was telling us about what's important for her in this work. And here I am in Alberta, as we are almost certainly going to be expanding the model into in and around Edmonton, and it's it just feels exciting. Before I talk a bit about the conference, I want to tell you where I am. I'm in Camrose, Alberta. It is the most conservative voting riding in the entire nation, and it is also the home of NAWO Global Energy. This will be the social enterprise that we are going to be sharing our model with, the Yaqui Energy model. And I'm at the home of its founder and executive director, Raj Rathnavali. Now, where this gets interesting is that Raj is Cree. He's also a Buddhist monk. And we had a lovely chat last night, and you usually ask Peter, so what's alive for you? And Raj said to me last night, your voice is getting softer. And I knew what he meant by that right away, is that I'm less cranky, because I think the world that we've been trying to create the one that we want to inhabit is beginning to unfold, and
Mm,
my energy is shifting from being in opposition with the current system to like, oh wow, we got to like implement this now, and seeing things expand are really exciting. So I'm carrying that thought with me today, recognizing that things have shifted in me enough that a mentor and coworker can notice when he just sees me a couple times a year, I guess, that it's like, oh, your voice has become more gentle.
mm, mm. That puts me in mind, Shaun. I think I was sharing with you that both Yvonne and I have been, for the first time in years, facilitating and hosting gatherings on land again. Most of our work has been online since the COVID and its mandates started to unfold. And I was picking this up in conversations with folks from the United Kingdom and the US and in Canada, and even in my own experiences. And it was really reinforced when we were on land. The two conversations we were hosting, one was in Brantford around a citizen-led initiative to respond to the housing crisis there. And then 2 days ago, I was back in Peterborough, Ontario, hosting a conversation alongside the Trent Community Research Center on what if we had what we needed to sustain local agriculture. And a really ubiquitous and pervasive frustration with business as usual, I guess, at every level was being voiced in both of those sessions. Red tape came up, and when you speak of your voice becoming softer, I think I've also been on a bit of that journey, that frustration that I was having with the limits of our current systems was making me resentful, to be honest, and even angry. And that didn't make for a very helpful psychic positioning, I guess. When we start this show, I say every day, we start with what's strong rather than what's wrong. And that's what we've been doing with the show. I found myself saying in public that we've reached the limit of our current systems. We need new ones. And I don't know it's necessarily to, as you said, take down the old ones, but there is a need to evolve. There is a need to innovate. There is a need to create something new and beyond that maybe even stands on the shoulders of things that are working. And the guests we've had on the show, and in large part, Shaun, because of the people that you know and the work that you've done your whole life, you're hanging out with people, and we're drawing attention to people who are creating the new things, the things that reach above and beyond the limits of what, and the systems that are hit their limits. The people in them are frustrated too. So this whispering from the future is, for me, the sense that there's also there's a horizon where things are different, and folks who are creating the new thing don't necessarily have to be in opposition, but at least be in relationship with the current system. And so bridging that, managing that relationship, blessed are the peacemakers, seems to be critical, and not necessarily to see the two things in opposition, but to see them in relationship with one another.
Well, a couple points. I was quite struck by last week's conversation with moderator Carmen Lansdowne of the United Church Canada, and she never mentioned a darn thing about Sunday mornings. And I asked her a couple times, and I think you did too. So what are you excited about these days? And she just kept listing off ways that the church was getting involved with community again, and a project on the downtown east side of Vancouver, and how excited she was about that. She talked about things happening in the Maritimes right across the country. And so I kind of chuckled at myself because, you know I think the solutions are different than a lot of us thought that they were.
Mm,
And as we're beginning to see the water that we've been swimming in,
mm,
man,
mm-hmm,
I think I've
mm-hmm,
been swimming in the water. I've noticed the other fish. I've noticed the weeds. I've noticed the ground on, the bottom of the ocean. I've not noticed the water I've been swimming in. And once you see it, you can't actually unsee it. And so the event I was speaking at yesterday in Calgary was put on by the United Way of Calgary, and there were some other sponsors as well. But it's about to the seniors serving sector. So I gave the keynote yesterday, and what do I know about the seniors serving sector? And not much, except for that you can pretty much guarantee that the relationship between government and nonprofits is out of date, and
mm,
everybody's frustrated because there's long lineups of people looking for what nonprofits can offer, and governments desperately need nonprofits to offer more to take pressure off their systems that are really struggling. And in their case, seniors in the hospital that don't need to be there because they could be exiting earlier, or seniors who would like to work, but they don't want to work full time, for example, or want to have some flexibility, that type of thing. We talked about in the healthcare system, social subscribing, where the doctor would have the ability to say, person needs supportive housing, subscribe it as a healthcare measure.
mm,
And I just found, to your point, the frustration of people. There's civil servants there, there's nonprofits there. The frustration of they're just done with the existing system and are just desperate for new approaches. And so, how fun for me to be able to say, you know, there are other ways of doing things. Um, and so that's what I was doing yesterday, and just helping people see the water that they're swimming in.
mm. One of the things I liked about what you did in the last show is we talked to, and there's some question around what is the theme of the show, and this is coming up in some of the summary that you offered during our last show is, um, and our friend and colleague David LePage would talk about a social value marketplace, but there's also sort of this new economics that's developing. And one of the things that was interesting about talking with Carmen last week was that here's a person who's the moderator of the United Church of Canada. And again, I thought, oh, we're going to add a little bit of conversation about faith communities and their role in our communities. Well, I guess we did actually talk about that, but it was remarkable how much of it actually centered on things like this new economic structure, or the new economic structures that are being built, and the ecology, as you pointed out, and a lot of our guests have represented and are actually living into, include things like social enterprise, social finance, including community bonds, um, outcomes purchasing, and social procurement. So here are all these different structures that put the power to create the communities we want to live into and inhabit back into the hands of people in their local environments, and what's proximate. So there is a bit of a, it's been funny to me to see the sort of preponderance on revisiting an economic structure. And I think now, Shaun, about a couple of years ago, you and I and Axiom and Encompass hosted a series of conversations on rewriting the social contract.
Hmm.
And it strikes me that the structures that we're exploring and that we're finding people who are actually bringing to life, uh, this is a social architecture that reaches above and beyond our current and the systems we've hit the limits of, that have the capacity to rewrite the social contract and a big piece of it seems that it's localizing, and it is very much about community building as an antidote, and the structures for that community building that is an antidote to most of what is frustrating a great many people now.
We've had shows highlighting so many different tools that are being used right now. There's something that they all have in common. Uh, all of these new financial tools, and that is that love and compassion is built into the economic model. And right now in our existing system, as you say, that is, we're all just done with it. Taxpayers are done with it too, by the way. It's enormous costs of responding to people who are struggling or not thriving. But in the existing system, you got nonprofits over here, and you've got the business over here, and they're separate. And in each of these tools that we've talked about, you've listed them. The love and compassion is a part of the mainstream economic model and is out competing the version that doesn't have love and compassion embedded.
There's a couple other things. There's love and compassion, but I think there's also something about um, I used to bounce around this phrase intimate investing.
Mm,
So we're not
relational.
investing in relational investing. Sure,
Yeah,
that's probably even better. Um, we're not when investing, say through a community bond, we're not investing something far away.
right.
We're investing directly in our neighbors. So the sense of relationship, proximity, love, and compassion is baked into this different set of financial
Yeah,
tools,
yeah,
which means that the money is now a means to an end and not the end in itself. And so it's not so much that we say, oh, all things money are bad. Well, he used the phrase money is medicine,
right.
for example.
Wahi from Raven Indigenous Capital Partners recently raised $50 million within a couple weeks for their outcomes purchasing fund. Yeah, that was quite an interview. Looking forward to having her back.
Well, I think that's
Um,
something else that struck me about the show is that because of relationships that I have and people that we've had the opportunity to work with, I've seen and danced in many of these concepts.
right,
But what's been interesting in the 15 or 16 shows we've done now is that all of this new way is being proven to be actually real,
right,
alive, and well.
right.
So by focusing on simply changing where we pay attention, we're
Right.
able to see that there is another reality. There is an alternative story. There is a new economics already in place and developing. And it seems to me like there's momentum.
Yes.
Like you were saying, Raven just raised 50 million. I think that's on the heels of 100 million. Separate.
Yeah, it was 100 million to support Indigenous entrepreneurs and 50 million for their social outcomes fund. Um,
These are significant
yeah.
accomplishments. These are significant markers of a future that's, as I said earlier, whispering to us from. Well, it's whispering to us.
Well, we're not highlighting projects on this show. These are all things that can be replicated anywhere using
Right.
these tools, many of them commonly used in the business sector, like procurement. David LePage
Mm-hmm.
makes the case that if only 2% of government procurement was supplied by social enterprises, it would employ 15,000 Canadians who currently do not have access to the labor market.
And that's
Wow.
a case where what I was saying earlier about how current systems can be in relationship with the
Yes.
emerging systems. That's the point where those two, um, what would you call them? Are they two structures? Are they two?
Two
Hmm,
paradigms, maybe.
That's nice. Yeah, thank you. Two paradigms actually meet, and where they meet strikes me as the place where some sort of gestalt can happen.
Yeah. Well, it should be mentioned too, the viewers know, I live in Winnipeg, and 20% of Winnipeg's population is now Indigenous. So if you're paying any attention at all, you kind of wonder, it's like, wonder what this reconciliation thing is all about. When they talk about systemic change, what does that mean? Well, Indigenous economies had a feature that our economies do not, and that is that they embed relations. All my relations is something we say all the time in Winnipeg, in ceremonies and so on. We're connected to each other. They embed that concept into the economy. So I told a story at the conference yesterday, United Way conference in Calgary, about an Indian agent in 1905 named William Graham, and he's in Saskatchewan near the Capel Valley, and he sees this moose hunter go by his house, and the moose hunter comes back a few hours later, and William Graham is an Indian agent. He says, "Oh, you know moose?" And the guy says, "Oh yeah, I got a moose." And Indian agent says, "Well, where is it?" And he says, "Oh, I'm just going back to the community to tell the women that I shot the moose." And then about an hour later, 15 women went by, go to the kill site to take the hide off the moose, cut it in 15 equal pieces, and bring it back and share it in the community. And the Indian agent says, "That's a really bad idea. Uh, you shouldn't be sharing it. You should just take it and use it for your family." And the moose hunter looks at him and says, "Well, that's really odd." And William Graham actually writes, like, "How peculiar. What a strange behavior. What an
Mm-hmm.
inferior way of doing things." So, but what does that mean in 2023, in October of
Mm-hmm.
2023? It means that their economic model is, not was, is uh, putting this relational value or love and compassion into how they do things. That's just part of their economic model. And so all these tools we've been talking about are exactly that. And community bonds, I was able to say to the conference yesterday, Fiona and I have a small amount of money invested in Calgary Local Investing YYC, a community bond in Calgary. I live in Winnipeg, but it makes me
Mm-hmm.
happy that our money is being used to help human beings thrive. And why would I want to have my money in something that makes me feel like I'm being extractive and
Mm-hmm.
causing
Mm-hmm.
issues in society? So,
Well,
um,
that's another thing that's come up in our conversations with guests on the show is that most of these um, financial structures or tools begin with community relationship and community conversation.
yeah.
So it's not that it's something that's done in isolation. These tools are very much seen as something to offer to community and emanate and are put to use out of what communities and community conversations suggest is important to people.
And every guest we've had, after every show we've done, I am happy. I'm happy because we're talking to people who are creating the future and we all want to inhabit, as you say. And I got a new possible tagline for us, Peter. It's the most optimistic hour on the internet, something like that. Because it is. I You watch
Absolutely.
the news, it's awful. It is awful. And but if we're not, as Peter Block said early on in one of our first shows, maybe it was the first show,
I think it was, yeah.
that if we're not calling what we do news, we're sunk. And so, yeah, it's news that I'm in Alberta and NAWO Global Energy will be in relationship with Raven Indigenous Capital Partners installing solar on rooftops on First Nations and Métis homes in Alberta and employing people who currently do not have access to the labor market. I'm here to say that is news, and Axiom is the only place you're going to find it.
Which is bananas, isn't it? Well, maybe that'll change. Maybe that
Yeah.
change will start something.
And Peter, yesterday, for the very first time, I was able to share the Changemaker 10. So
Right,
10
right.
different things, times when I in my career have been totally stopped in my tracks as I'm realizing the water that I'm swimming in. And to let our viewers know, Axiom and Encompass are going to team up to publish, and what would you call it, resource that people can use. It's going to start and revolve around this Changemaker 10. And we're going to go over these 10 points right now.
Yeah, why don't we just take our short break, Shaun, as we usually do? That's another. It would be fun to talk about what it's been like to be behind the scenes in making news too. So maybe we'll touch on that towards the end. But Shaun, you have been an advocate for some of the components of the form we're using, and one of them, of course, is a short musical interlude with an invitation. So why don't we do that now, and then we'll come back and I look forward to exploring the Changemaker 10 as you've formed them and I believe presented them yesterday. So this too is just in. So with that, Yvonne, why don't we roll our short break and then we'll come back and play around with the Changemaker 10.
If you would like to experience genuine connection with others, being heard, patience, levity and laughter, warmth, light, smiles, new, deepening, and healing relationships, then cultivate community with us. Coined by participants as a fortnightly feast for the soul, these 90-minute gatherings hosted by Axiom News offer a weaving of small group dialogue led by carefully crafted questions, followed by light, whole group reflection. Each dialogue round deepens connection and enlivens possibility between and amongst those who participate. All are welcome. Learn more and RSVP for our next gathering by visiting the Events tab in A New Commons, our sister initiative in Mighty Networks, at anewcommons.mn.co/events.
You know, I was thinking of saying something towards the end of our time together today, Shaun. I think I'd like to say it now, simply because every time I watch that that invitation, I'm reminded of the beauty and the art that our producer Yvonne Hollanday brings to the show. And she's been with us, I don't know, I like to say before, maybe 150 years or so. We've been together for a long time. And that means we've seen everything from the desktop publishing revolution to the birth of the internet to the advent of Twitter and Facebook. Even Google was new while we were working together. So as the way news is delivered for small and intimate settings and organizations has changed, Yvonne has been the person who's jumped in on every count and sorted out how these platforms work and how best we can produce the news that reflects the world that we want to inhabit. And, it takes architecture, it takes structure, it takes a lot of work to put these things together. And, what you see in an hour is the result of many hours before and after these events. And Yvonne has been there every step of the way to produce each of these shows, news in just about every form you could possibly imagine, as well as each of the events that we're hosting. So I think it's worth noting that, and I just wanted to put in a word of gratitude and acknowledgement for each of those facts. And so, Yvonne Hollanday, thank you for everything you're
Well, you
doing
should say
behind the
that
scenes.
she's feeling very miserable today, and she knows you and I could not figure out how to make this happen. And yes, Yvonne, you're amazing. We love you very much. Thank you for for being part of the team
and making it work. So we can be here to talk and to bring stories and invite guests into a space that that works and makes sense and is beautifully and well held. All right, she can't talk, but there we are. All right. Okay, so you were Shaun keynoting yesterday. Maybe just remind us again who you were speaking to and why. And then I understand the Changemaker 10 was it the big reveal? Was the first reveal of the Changemaker 10
just kind of
yesterday? Okay.
Testing it out. I'm excited about what Axiom and Encompass can do together. Online Conversations loves to be a part of the release. We have to tweak what we're about to present, and I'm interested in our viewers' input. So, Yvonne, maybe you could put info@encompass.coop just there as an email address that people could send their comments to about these. But I mean, the particular context that I was talking to Peter yesterday was seniors, but these 10 really speak to the relationship between governments and nonprofits. And so it doesn't matter if you're working with folks who are incarcerated, with newcomers, with homeless sector, you name it. These 10 observations about our existing paradigm, where we've come from, where we're going. I could tell you the temperature outside when I realized each one of these things, who I was with. And I love that feeling where you think and then your head just like, I can do that very quickly. And I actually
An
love
insight and an aha. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I love the
a
feeling.
generative moment.
I was wrong. And it just flips just like that. And then it's an awesome feeling, actually. So the first one that I think is really important is just to say the only thing that's going to work is different. And I said to the conference yesterday, if you think the government, and particularly the Alberta government, is all of a sudden going to realize, is like, oh my goodness, we've really realized that we should be dumping huge amounts of money into the nonprofit sector, and you think that's coming, then I want to come and shake your hand, because I'm done. I really don't think governments are geared to do that, because they're using outdated tools. And so the number one of the Changemaker 10 is that the only thing that's going to work is different. The existing outcomes of the existing system are so bad that it's ripe for disruption. And so that's the first. And Yvonne, you can stick up the second, and Peter, comment as we go along here.
Well, I think what I was saying at the opening was that there is this frustration from everyone, in the system, beside the system, alongside the system. So the notion that can we just free ourselves up to the possibility that the only thing that's going to work is different, and release ourselves from the shackles and the bonds of the way we're doing things now, and play a little bit to discover what's possible.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, because you're not going to see the emerging future if you're hanging on to the past. The second thing,
the contrast can be very instructive, so it's worth knowing where we are. That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All
right.
The
Number
second
two.
Stunner for me is when I realized that, wait a minute, nonprofits are subsidizing government, not the other way around. A colleague of mine in Winnipeg, Jamil Madood, was he is the executive director of the Main Street Project, like a homeless shelter, lots of love and compassion there. And the city of Winnipeg decided it was going to save some money and cut funding to Main Street Project and some other nonprofits. and Jamil went to city council and said, look, you guys are elected and good on you. It's your job to determine the budget. I'm just here to be polite and let you know, prepare your police cars, prepare your ambulances, prepare your fire engines, and you should probably let the province know to open up some new jail cells because we're shutting down on our programming on March 31st, the day that the funding is cut to us. So just letting you know, that's my presentation. Have a good day.
And that was probably within his allotted 5 minutes, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And so boom. It's like, and I think that, nonprofits, we are not being subsidized by government. That's a language from the old from the existing paradigm. We have to realize that we are subsidizing governments because if we stopped offering our services, society would collapse, and taxpayers would be on the hook for responding to even more people who are struggling.
And I think that offers, when you say that, Shaun, it offers to me like it's a attitudinal shift. We talk about a gestalt or paradigm shift. It's not that the people who are doing the work are the poor second cousins who ought to be going hat in hand to find the funding to do the things that they see need to be done. It's the other way around.
Right.
Organizations who are doing the good work in the world are actually, there was the notion of social role valorization circulating a few years ago, and simply the idea that we need to valorize the work that's actually being done and each person in it, so that they are seen as the locus of control and the locus of agency,
right?
And the beginning point of the kinds of things we want to see, not the end point. It's so I think that's an attitudinal shift that could cause the shoulders to go back and the chin to be straightened out to say, no, we are actually the reason what's happening that's working is happening and working.
Well, and following on point 2 is point 3, that realizing that solutions actually save government's money. We have to stop asking government to spend money on solutions. I'll tell you where the money is right now. It's in policing, justice, health, and EIA. Those are all examples of areas of government that are struggling enormously. Huge bloated budgets, responding in a very ineffective way. And what the nonprofit sector provides is a much more effective intervention to reduce the number of people who are struggling, and therefore reduce the burden in these budgets. And so our solutions, we can roll them out more effectively and more cost effectively than is the existing system. So Peter, if I were to say to you, okay, well, here's 20 gangsters in Winnipeg, and the police are going to spend $2 million responding to them in the next year. And how do they know that? Because they spent $2 million responding to them last year and $2 million responding to them in the year before. And if the nonprofit sector said, well, for $1 million, we could basically eliminate that 2 million. I mean, does it cost $1 million? No, it saves $1 million. So, and the nonprofit sector and progressives for decades have said, if you just spent money now, you'd save money later. And the argument itself isn't particularly, it's not landing in an effective way with government. But that's so
the answer to most of our social problems then is not to spend more money, but to save more money.
Yeah, we can talk
now, okay, that sounds like a hard conservative economic, even neoliberal. So this is where some of these gestalts can get tricky, because what I've just said is aligned with what you're suggesting, but it sounds very strange to say that the way to solve our social problems is to save money.
Well, it's because our solutions are actually cheaper than the solutions that the interventions that are being offered right now in the business as usual environment. So to me, it's relational. Yeah, you need money for nonprofits to do the work that they're doing, especially to scale it. But it's less money than the system is currently spending. That's the key. But
And so maybe along with this shift, we can stop talking about nonprofits and start talking about social profits.
yeah, nonprofits is an interesting term for sure, but social profits would be much better. So what follows on that is the fourth point, is that convincing governments to increase spending based on these incredible value propositions isn't working. And what we mean by that is that everybody knows, and I mean everybody, that supportive housing is cheaper than having all these systems respond perpetually to people who are struggling. How do we know that? Well, there's been 1,000 studies around the world. The largest ever research project ever undertaken in the history of Canada on any subject is the at-home Chez Soi program about 10 years ago, where they took people in 5 cities and gave them housing, and then people in those same cities no housing, and they tracked the interaction with these reactive services. And sure enough, the value proposition was phenomenal, especially for people who are really struggling and were in emergency wards all the time, or incarcerated, or in courts. So, and then the police having to respond rather than getting the guy that's in your garage stealing something. They're responding to someone who's in crisis on the riverbank in Winnipeg. So I
So
just think,
a shift from reactive to proactive as a stance as well. It's a shift
yeah,
from reactive services to proactive ones.
but I think we've been making that point for decades. Just
Sure.
trying to tell
Yeah.
governments, you got to be more proactive. You'd save money rather than being reactive, but it's not working. The argument isn't working. So this is the fourth point. We just have to admit governments aren't listening. And it's not because they're mean, honestly. I mean, they might have assumptions about poor people or people who aren't thriving, and preventing them from doing the right thing. It's just a waste of money, or maybe the people deserve being homeless. I don't know what that's all about, but I'm we're leading up to, we need to be using new tools because we're not being heard and getting the society that we all want. And so it leads to the fifth point, which is fascinating for me. We founded Build in 2006, a long time ago. I didn't know what a social enterprise was. All I know is Build is a nonprofit, and the only kind of money that nonprofits got was funding. I knew that to be true. And realizing, and I can tell you the day, there's 2 types of government money. I realized that I was driving with Lucas Stewart, who's been a guest of ours. He's now the executive director of the Wrench in Winnipeg, a wonderful bike program that is becoming more entrepreneurial. By the way, what a great episode that was about bike culture. And we were trying to respond. He and I were working at Build. We're trying to respond to the massive numbers of people that were wanting work, that had criminal records, no work experience, no grade 12, no driver's licenses, were largely Indigenous or newcomer. And government said to us what they always say, which is, we went to them and said, give us more funding. And the government said, basically, we can't afford to save money. So we can't afford to give you funding. Yeah, we know it would save money, but we can't afford to do that. So Lucas and I are frustrated. We're driving by this public housing complex, and we saw that Manitoba Housing had hired a contractor to put the exterior on this public housing complex. It was a big job, couple city blocks. And I said to Lucas, well, why isn't Manitoba Housing hiring us? And Lucas said, I don't know. We're a contractor. We've got a truck. We've got a carpenter. I guess we should just tell Manitoba Housing that we're a contractor now. So we did. And now Build and a few other social enterprises do about $6 million a year of business with Manitoba Housing. And we realized, well, there's two types of government money. There's money that governments are using to engage businesses based on outcomes. And then there's a little crack of money that's for funding for nonprofits. So important realization for me, there's two types of government money, and the big money is not in the funding slice, it's in the procurement slice, or money that government's always spending even in its own departments, and that's what we have to go after if we want to scale. The number six. So funding isn't a good money tool to scale solutions. It is funding is about compliance and control. That's why governments say we got to see your receipts. You can't have any money left over afterwards. If you're going to veer from the budget that we agreed upon, you got to get our permission. It's all about compliance and control. And can you imagine if government were to say to a contractor who's building a bridge, we got to agree to a budget ahead of time, all the line items. You got to show us all your receipts. You can't have any money left over afterwards. And if you decide along the way you find a better way of doing things that's more efficient, you got to come back and get our permission. So can you imagine the single-fingered salutes that the private sector would give to government if they were having to use funding? So there's just no funding, just that governments think that it costs more money to do these things, and the relationship is not about the outcomes, the impact on government systems. It's really about compliance and control.
And managing compliance and control is incredibly expensive.
It is
incredibly expensive and not particularly productive.
Well said. So the seventh point then is, following on that, the governments don't particularly value what they fund. If they did, they would really be cranking the funding to nonprofits, right? But they sure do value what they buy. And governments buy a lot more stuff than they fund. And so it's a really critical point for me. I was meeting with our bookkeeper at Build, our accountant, and he was the one that said, there's two kinds of money. It was just from him. He says, I love this money that comes in for drywalling at Manitoba Housing, because we just send an invoice, 500 square feet at $25 a square foot, and boom, we get paid, and it just goes into our accounts, and we have some flexibility as to what we can do with it. It's such low administration. It's like, oh wow, governments didn't ask any questions. They just made sure we were delivering the outcome. And so this would be, David LePage's point is that when we're engaging in procurement relationships, they're paying market rates. They're paying full value for what it is that they're buying. And I think that that's a really critical point. And procurement, following on that, is number 8, is that procurement allows government to choose the option that makes the most sense to them. And right now, nonprofits are not part of that comparison. So the police may know that it's more cost effective to provide 20 gangsters supportive employment at Build, but that's someone else's job.
And they're not in the business of, it's not the business they're in, so to speak.
Yeah, and their job is to respond, but they don't have the tool to engage, or they haven't had the tool to engage nonprofits such as Build to respond and in a proactive way, as you say. And so procurement allows them to do that. So we're not saying to the police, well, why don't you fund a supportive employment program? They experience that as reduced resources for an increased workload. But when we go to them with procurement and say, look, we can cut your $2 million in staff time to respond to these 20, and it'll only cost you $1 million, that to them it feels like increased resources for a decreased workload. And when we talk to them about being a public safety option, it's like, we like that option and we would like to engage you to do that. So let the nonprofit sector step up from the kids' table and become part of the comparison across all these struggling departments, that we can provide options that are better than what is currently being offered in the business as usual model.
Well, and when you say step up from the kids' table, Shaun, the image that comes to mind is that it's, to some degree, it's a step away from a patriarchal colonial relationship
Yes,
to
good point.
where the table is set by someone else. You eat what's put in front of you and you do as you're told.
Yeah.
To instead, the real revenue answer, the money to be found to do the good work in the world that we feel must be done, is to be found in what governments buy, not what they fund.
Right.
And that market is much bigger and the resources are much more available.
Yeah.
And more liberating than in the old style of we'll do what we're told.
Exactly. And police, for example, are procuring police officer hours. They're procuring police cars, and we need those things. We'd like to give them a new tool, which is buying, not having to go out and respond to people.
Right.
So that's what procurement allows them to do.
All
So
right,
moving
number
on to number
9.
9. Oh, go ahead.
Nope, number 9 yet.
Number 9, fascinating, is that in the business world, dollars grow when good investments are rewarded. So if I were to invest $100,000 in something, and in a year I get $110,000 back, I've made $10,000. And I'm going to want to say, I want to do that again. And at this time, can we do it with 200,000? Like it rewards a growing of the amount of money that's put in up front. And the money just flows to things where there's that reward. However, that is not the case with funding.
Right.
And this is a really critical point to understand, is that we need to scale the things that are really working great. And funding is just not a good tool to do that. But using investments in this way are. And we have a lot
Well,
of.
there's something about being in flow. You know, when you start to receive feedback from the field, this creates an excitement about what you're doing, which is going to attract more of what's working. So that's a virtuous cycle that comes when, as you say, good investments are rewarded. That will cause those investments and those dollars to grow.
Yeah.
All right, number 10.
10th and the last point is that nonprofits are really critical part of being able to partner with governments to embark on a disruptive path by using funding and procurement and other tools that are commonly used in the business sector. And these are the tools we've been highlighting on this show at 2:00 Eastern time on Thursdays. And they're pretty darn exciting. When I was the chair of the board at Purpose Construction in Winnipeg, we had a couple come in and said, look, we've got $100,000 of extra money. You can have it for a while. We'd like to loan it to you, and you can pay us back, over 5 years. Well, we paid them a couple percent interest, I think, and we were able to avoid 5 or 6% interest at the bank, and just not having cash flow problems for a period of time. And it was just great for everyone because the investors were happy, and Purpose Construction was happy. It kind of served a purpose. So, you can imagine tools like procurement, impact investment. Impact investment can raise capital for land trusts, for affordable housing. These are all really powerful tools that can really help us build the world that we all want to inhabit.
Hear, hear.
And so,
and we talk about the desire for change, and that I think you started with the only thing that's going to work is different. And so I'm thinking now of some of James Collins' earlier work, even before Good to Great. He wrote some interesting papers on what he called catalytic mechanisms. And I think what you've outlined here, Shaun, are some of the catalytic mechanisms that could give us a rally point to meet and to work inside of these processes to break through to the other side, to what's new and possible, while maintaining relationships with each other and making better use of the gifts and assets at our disposal. And changemakers are all the folks you've mentioned: people in government, social enterprise, non or social profits, as we might like to begin to call them, as well as financiers. And we're seeing all of these folks showing up and creating this world. And some of them we've even seen here on this show.
Well, it's been fun today, Peter. I'm glad that we
has been
virtually connected. And again, this is the most optimistic hour on the internet. I feel great, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Absolutely. We're doing the good work here. All right. So with that, we'll call our time together to close and to a completion. Join us again next week on Thursday at 2 Eastern Time, 7 in the UK. The UK time slot is particularly of interest this time around because next week we will be joined by Angela Fell, who is co-founder of Northern Heart and Soul and the Neighborhood Democracy Movement, and Trish Kulkarni, an award-winning journalist, researcher, and community organizer, who is the progenitor of something he calls reflective journalism. Both of them hail from the UK. We hope that you'll join us. In the meantime, you can subscribe below and find us at axiomnews.com on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X. I'm your host, Peter Pula. Thanks for listening.